Hi, folks. This is Harold Ree with the Pawprint Animal Rescue Podcast. Before we get to the amazing Jesse Freidin, author of Finding Shelter, just wanted to let you know that iTunes has now changed its name to Apple Podcasts. iTunes is the very popular app for podcasts found on your iPhone, your iPad, your Mac computer. It's simply a name change to Apple Podcasts. Nothing to do, nothing to change. You can still find Pawprint the way you usually do. Wanted to give you that heads up. Thanks, and on to the show.
This is Pawprint, an animal rescue community, episode 114. I'm Nancy Ree.
And I'm Harold Ree.
Today's guest is Jesse Freidin, photographer and author.
One of my mentors suggested that I photograph dogs, and I thought that was such a funny thing to do. It sounded kind of cheesy, and I didn't think it would be very interesting, but the moment that I started working with this dog, I really had this kind of aha moment.
Jesse's main work revolves around animal portraiture, and for his latest book, Finding Shelter, he searched for animals and volunteers in animal shelters across the United States. We're pleased to have Jesse on the show as he shares his thoughts on photography and animal rescue. Jesse also has a book tour going on to support Finding Shelter. If you want to learn more about Jesse, you can go to our show notes at thisispawprint.com/114. That's the number 114.
Finding Shelter was really just a personal side project to begin with that I did. I guess I started a couple years ago when I was between LA and San Francisco, and I always have some sort of creative project that I'm working on outside of my private commissions because it just keeps me on my toes. And I never thought that it would really be a book. I didn't have much of an outcome. I just wanted to explore my theory that, after spending over 10 years in the dog world and watching people with their animals and certainly being very involved in the rescue world, I had this theory that within the shelter system and our rescue system, that the dogs were having an equal, if not more powerful, positive effect on the people. And I just set out to shoot that and reveal that. After doing it for a while, I dove deep into my project, which happens, and hoped it could be a book. So I thought I would self-publish, and I did a Kickstarter. It was very successful, which was just pure luck. I'd never done one before, and a week into the Kickstarter, I got a publication deal, and it was a very happy way to wrap it up. So,
how did you get into photography?
People ask me that all the time, and it's kind of a fun thing to answer. I basically just have memories of being young, and I had this toy Fisher-Price camera. It was a toy Polaroid camera, and I think whoever gave that to me, I just was so enchanted with it. I was so taken with the process of holding a little object up to your face and looking through the viewfinder and getting to kind of be a voyeur and getting to just create in a kind of a private, removed way. There was something really wonderful about that for me, and I think that really started me, on the path towards falling in love with photography. And then, I was never really taught. I didn't take a lot of classes, but in college, I kind of fell in love with Polaroids, and I started collecting them and shooting a lot of Polaroid film. And that's how I taught myself mostly just how to be a photographer, how to interact with my subjects, how to just really fall in love with what I was making. And I loved how physical it was. And then, but I never thought that I could do it as a profession. I never even considered myself an artist, really. I was kind of just doing it on my own. But eventually after college, I started, I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And to be honest, as most people, so I started working at a dog daycare place in San Francisco. And, I was young and I just needed some money. And someone encouraged me to take some classes at City College in the photo department. And it was great. I learned a little bit about lighting. I fell in love with being in the darkroom and printing. And there have been a few people along the way that have encouraged me to really take it seriously. And I think that was what pushed me to have confidence in myself, and also realize that, there's nothing else I want to do with my life other than be an artist. And so I just kind of pursued it and ended up here somehow.
Yeah. Initially starting out, what were your favorite subjects? And then from there, how did you get to animal photography?
Yeah. So, when I was, in college and after college and stuff, what I was really interested in was portraiture. Portraiture for me was a very intimate way of interacting with people around me. And I just loved portraiture. And I did some landscape work as well, but really I just wanted to look at people. I wanted to use photography as a tool to interact with people in an intimate way. So that's really what fueled me. And at some point, a few years after moving to San Francisco, I got an apprenticeship at a family photography studio. It was one of the very well-known studios in San Francisco, and so I apprenticed there for a year, and I was very lucky to have some excellent mentors, and that was my real education. And I don't have an MFA. I didn't go to school to learn how to be a photographer, but I learned about portraiture, about working with families, about running a business, and I realized that I didn't want to photograph families, but one of my mentors there while I was apprenticing knew that I worked with dogs, and he suggested that I photograph dogs. And I thought that was such a funny thing to do. It sounded kind of cheesy, to be honest. And I was like, who wants to photograph dogs? Because all of the work that I was seeing, this was like 10 plus years ago, a lot of it was pretty cheesy. A lot of it was kind of silly, and, I just didn't like it. So that, to be honest, it encouraged me to try and do it differently. So I took my Hasselblad and some black and white film one day and asked a friend of mine who had a really cute pug named Gus if I could photograph them just to try it out. And I didn't think it would be very interesting, but honestly, the moment that I started working with this dog, I really had this kind of aha moment that this is really fascinating. This is a kind of portraiture that I'd never done before. I could do it in a new way. I could approach it in more of a fine art way. And it really just kind of got me going.
So from there, was it just like, aha, I'm going to be an animal photographer, and you hang out your shingle, or was it a little bit longer? Oh, really?
Yeah. That's basically what happened. I would really, at that point in my life, I was dedicating myself to this apprenticeship. It was unpaid. So it was, I knew that I was doing it because I really wanted to figure out how to be a photographer. Exactly. And I had this moment where I realized, what, I can do animal photography in a new way, in a way that no one's done it before, in a fine art way. I can produce fine art prints. I can shoot with film and do it really beautifully. Yeah. And literally after that shoot, I thought about what I needed to do. So I basically built a portfolio by photographing friends and their dogs. I didn't have any clients yet. I made a website. I felt very prepared, because I had been apprenticing and learning so much from, my mentors, and they really helped me. And yeah, I think about it, it was pretty crazy, but in a few months I had basically put myself out there, hung my shingle up and said, I'm a new photographer, and I'm going to prove to everyone that I can do this in a better way. And, my goal was always I like to have lofty goals for myself and try and see how close I can get. But my goal was to always become, the best dog photographer out there. And I don't know if that's something that anyone can really be, but that made me work really hard. And it just started coming together. So
when I see your portraiture, it's like somewhat of a past era. Digital photography now, it's more about the glitz and the glamour and all that. Whereas I find that your photography it's just like a little bit more understated, but I think also a little bit more, I don't know, classy or classic. I don't know what the best way to put that. I guess my question is like, who are your influences? Who do you aspire when you think about a great photography?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And you know what? I totally agree with you. I think digital photography does lean more towards the glitz and glamour. And when I teach classes, a couple times a year, and I always teach students, even though they're shooting digital, I think all my students always shoot digitally, but I always teach them that there's such it's very tempting when you shoot digitally to put your camera on auto everything, auto focus, auto exposure, just auto everything. But it takes away your responsibility as a photographer to make decisions. And I think that makes, when you shoot digitally, you want to shoot a ton. You're not thinking, and you lose your intentional, your intentional creative decision making sort of role. So I think that's a big thing that's sort of lost when you shoot with a digital camera. And I think that I've just always shot slowly. And I like when people say that the work looks timeless. And I think that part of that is because for me, what I'm interested in is the connections that people have with their animals. And I'm interested in really observing and just making sure that all the images that I create and show are full of meaning and intention. And I think that that is kind of the essence of analog photography for me, at least. So I forgot what your question was.
No, well, really the last photography-oriented question. I mean, who are your, I don't know, who are your influences? Yeah.
Yeah. Influences. Diane Arbus is one of my favorite photographers. Annie Leibovitz, Duane Michals, Avedon for sure. These are all people that shoot, portraiture. Most of the photographers were shooting film. But I think the reason why I love them so much is because there's a real there's a depth to their work. They were so intentional about what they were doing. They weren't creating any fluffy images. They wanted to explore people's personalities and their darknesses and their connections. And there's always such mystery and desire in their images. And, I love bringing that to my work, even though people sometimes think that quote unquote pet photography, which I don't like that term, or dog photography, isn't a deep practice. But for me, it really is. For me, it is so much about the human condition. It's about us as human animals as much as it is about the dogs. So yeah, that's really what inspires me.
All right. I love all those. Diane Arbus, Richard Avedon. I mean, those are some great photographers. And I definitely do see those influences. So thank you.
That's good.
All right. We're speaking to Jesse Freidin. He's a photographer and author of a new book, Finding Shelter. Switching to the sort of animal rescue or animal component, who are maybe some of the animals either in your own life or that you've come across that really have sort of either inspired you or really kind of piqued your interest?
That's a great question. I think that I've certainly learned an incredible amount from my own dog, Pancake. He is not a rescue dog. I got him before I learned a whole lot about the rescue world. But he's my first dog, and as I have shared the past 11 years with him, I've certainly learned just so much about what dogs bring to us, why the humans and dogs are so deeply connected. And I think that as I've worked with so many clients over the years and donated tons of time and resources to different rescues all over the country, we humans have overbred animals. It's our responsibility to care for them. And whether they're puppies or old dogs, whether they've been abused or not, we created this companion animal in our lives, and we haven't cared for them well enough. We haven't made sure that that we don't let them suffer. And that's really a big part of why I think rescue work is so interesting, is because animals get stuck in a shelter and it's not their fault. And I think, unfortunately, what's happened over our generations, that we've built this connotation of the animal shelter as a really sad place where dogs that are bad end up. And it's just so inaccurate. Bad dogs don't go to the shelter. Bad people should go to the shelter. People have really let down their animals. They've abused them, they've abandoned them, and that's how they get stuck in the shelter. And so, I think that there's something really beautiful about this project, and in that it helps reinterpret what happens in a shelter. And every single dog I've met over all my years, whether it's a private client, whether it's dogs that I've met on the road for this project, they're all the same. They're all the same dog. They're all the same creature. They all want to give the same amount of love and receive the same amount of love. So it certainly has been a great way to just cement that concept for me that all dogs really are kind of the same creature. So
I'm sure your clientele, maybe a mix of pure breed type dogs or, American kennel breed type dogs versus sort of the classic mutt or mix. Have you seen any trends? In other words, has it maybe tilted more towards rescue dogs as far as your subjects who actually reach out to you to get their photos done?
Yeah, I mean, I just scheduled 2 new clients. Actually, they're old clients that are scheduling a new session just yesterday. They're 2 of my favorite clients. I've been working with them for years, and it's funny because they both have had many purebred dogs from breeders, and now over the past couple of years, they have shifted to rescuing dogs. I love that. I think that people you might not expect to really get into the rescue movement are doing it. And it's really exciting to see. People are realizing that there's beautiful, wonderful, loving dogs at the shelter that fit their lives. And I think there is really becoming more of a sort of social movement towards rescuing. It's becoming, the cause of the moment, and I hope that sticks for sure. I hope it's not a fleeting thing, but more and more and more and more of my clients have wonderful shelter dogs, and it's great.
Thanks for sharing that, because I'm sure you're kind of almost at the front lines to really witness any sort of change in trends. So thanks.
Yeah. I really think that even the people that I work with, clients, et cetera, who are getting dogs from breeders, which is totally acceptable as long as those breeders are responsible. They may, have a certain kind of dog that they want to work with, that they've been getting dogs from a certain breeder for years and years and years. But on top of that, they're also involved in rescue work in some way. So I think there's really this great movement that's happening, and it's very exciting.
Awesome. Finding shelter. It's like, I guess the first thing is, where'd you find these shelters? Because you actually traveled pretty much across the coast to coast, across the United States.
I love a road trip. I love driving across the country and photographing. So it was very selfish of me to base this project around that because A, I knew I'd enjoy it. So, but B, I really wanted to use this opportunity to get a really good kind of cross section of different kinds of shelters and rescues across the country. So I chose purposely a few shelters that were very well funded in cities, that were no kill, that were just beautiful and state of the art, and everything was great. And then I also chose purposely some shelters and rescues that literally had no money. That there was a shelter in El Paso that I chose specifically because their euthanasia rate was like 90% or something.
Oh my!
Almost when they opened, and in less than a year or two, they went down to like 75, and that seems insignificant if you don't think about it. But El Paso, not a lot of money in that city, not a ton of education about spay and neuter programs, and just a community where dogs are abandoned at a very high rate. So to think about just through volunteers, not through staff, but through volunteers, the euthanasia rate went down, from 90 to 75%. It's incredible. And
Right.
I wanted to really tell those stories and meet those people. And so I just I reached out to different shelters across the country, and I'd say just about every single one was excited about the project, and I just went for it.
I'm sure you had that one organization who was very wary of why would you want to photograph our dogs and cats. And
Yeah, it's a really good point. I was surprised to find that, and there was actually two shelters that were much more well funded that actually agreed to do the project, and I drove out there and photographed them, but they ended up not signing my contract, and they pulled out of the project. And there was maybe one or two other kind of high profile groups that I wanted to work with, but I think they all backed away because of that exact reason, because they were wary of what would I show and what would my angle be, and that's understandable. And I spent a lot of time communicating with these groups to make sure they trusted me and knew what my intentions were. But it's understandable, not everyone wants to let some outside source come in and kind of expose what's happening. My intention was to expose the beauty and the powerful work, but I think they were afraid that I would expose something else.
I can get why folks would be a little bit wary, especially if there's no relationship. But to me, right. It's like, hey, professional photographer wants to come in and photograph. Like, what's not to like about that, right? So,
yeah, totally. I that's what I thought too. But I was approaching it very gently and making sure people really knew who I was. And all the shelters that I worked with, as a way to thank them for giving me such great content. And I mean, these shelters and volunteer coordinators, they spend a lot of time on this for free. They helped me schedule people and coordinate and made space for me. So I made sure that they, got copies, high-res copies of the photos, and they could use them however they wanted. So I think it was a good give and take. So
how was the process of choosing the subjects? Was it you? Was it the shelter? Was it a little bit of a combination?
Yeah, that was definitely a good challenge. I wanted to make sure that this book represented a good cross-section of people. I wanted men, women, young, old, a varied group of backgrounds. And I just wanted to be as diverse as possible. But unfortunately, the rescue shelter world, it's not incredibly diverse for a variety of reasons. So I worked as hard as I could to make it diverse. I asked every shelter to give me a good, sort of diverse group of people. And they did. I always asked for I liked having sort of youth volunteers. They were really interesting. I loved having, older retired people. It was interesting to sort of see what these shelters pulled up for me, because I asked, so they only had 10 people. I said, just give me 10 people, think about the best people. And they did a very thoughtful job. So.
Okay. If people were to look at your book, what message do you want folks to get from reading your book?
First, I want them to be moved. I want them to read the stories and cry tears. I want it to be that powerful. And I want them to look at this project, look at this book, and say, wow, the shelter is such a beautiful, a moving, amazing place. I want to get involved. I want to rescue a dog. Look at these wonderful, perfect dogs. They're so happy. They've got great stories. That's what I want them to see. I also want people equally to get a kind of gentle but clear understanding of how unfortunate it is that we put a lot of animals in the shelter, and many, 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 many of them don't come out. So I want them to kind of see that there's a bittersweet reality to this. And most importantly, come away thinking, I've never looked at a shelter in such a positive light. And hopefully it'll retrain people to not be intimidated by the animal shelter and to want to go in and get involved.
Wow, thank you. We're talking to Jesse Freidin. He's a photographer. Sounds like you don't necessarily have one studio. I mean, you really do photograph across the country. How do you find clients, or how do clients find you, and how do you handle your crazy schedule?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. So I started out in San Francisco. That's where I had my first studio. I was there for a long time. And then I had a second studio in LA. And I did a lot of back and forth, but I'm from the East Coast. So I came back. I'm in the Berkshires now. That's where my studio is. And I do. I travel a lot. Now I'm in San Francisco and Los Angeles about 3 times a year, and I'll schedule a week in each location. And I have I just got a great roster of clients out in California. And I love going out there. I have a lot of repeat clients. And I think because I've established my work out there, people know me, and that's great. People also find me online a lot. I put exhibits up around the country. I do events. I'm out in the community as much as I can, meeting people and showing my work and just being a nice guy and meeting clients. And I think that works really well. So
if folks notice, hey, Jesse, I noticed that you chose black and white for your photography book. What would you say is the power of black and white photography versus what nowadays is just more normal, right? The typical color digital photograph from your iPhone.
For me, black and white photography it takes away every possible distraction that you could have. It takes away letting sort of the shortcut that I think some artists use to let color fill in for meaning. And I don't like that. I've always loved black and white because it really, really, really simplifies the moment. And if you can create a strong black and white image, you have to rely on the connection between photographer and subject. You have to rely on the emotion that's in that. You have to rely on this perfect moment that's, just really captures a whole lot of content with very little information. And for me, that's just exciting. I like a challenge. I love shooting in color once in a while, but to be honest, I just kind of am bored by color. But black and white is so exciting. I love seeing things in tones of gray, and it's exciting. And I think it really simplifies things. And if it makes you have to rely on style and composition and emotion when you shoot black and white. So
all right. How do folks find you?
Yeah, great question. So I have a website, which is just my name, jessefreidin.com. It's JESSEFREIDIN.com. I think it's a fun website. There's some great photos. There's a bunch of information about me and my process. And clients can just shoot me an email through my website, and I can walk them through the process of how I work and scheduling a session and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I'm also on social media, on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and I just share a bunch of photos of dogs. My dog, other clients' dogs, if you are into that kind of thing.
Okay. Well, we're talking to Jesse Freidin, photographer and author of Finding Shelter. I guess really last question, which is, if you had that magic wand and could do something about the state of animal rescue, what do you think that would be?
What a good question. I think it would be this. I think that for whatever reason, the world of animal rescue all over the country, all over the world, people are very divided, and it's mysterious. I don't know why, and it's upsetting. One shelter doesn't like the other shelter. One person is into no-kill. One person is accepting of the fact that animals have to be put down. So my one wish would be that we could have a unified front. It's not about money or resources or cities. It's just about all the rescues and the shelters accepting each other and just working together a little bit better. That's what I would hope for.
We want to say thank you to Jesse Freidin for sharing his story. If you want to learn more about Jesse, his new book, Finding Shelter, you can go to our show notes at thisispawprint.com/114. If you'd like to meet me or Nancy on social media, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, look for This Is Pawprint, all one word. You can find all our episodes on your favorite podcast app, like Apple Podcasts, formerly known as iTunes, SoundCloud, or YouTube. Make sure to hit subscribe to get the latest episodes immediately. Join us next week when we speak to Nicole Holland, entrepreneur and podcaster. She gives some amazing ideas on helping your animal rescue organization spread their own message. We want to say thanks to all of you for sharing Pawprint with your friends and family. We're now at 114 episodes, and we couldn't have done it without you. And remember, you spread a positive message of love and peace by saving an animal. Have a great day, and see you next time on Pawprint.
Pawprint is a production of EVER Education.
You can't handle the truth.